Mr. Cattani, it is a great honor to have you here. As I said, you are the voice of European citizens in general, because we are one, we're all citizens, and we need equality of all to be free. There can be no exceptions, especially not in Europe, which is one of the most developed parts of the world, and where we would suggest, and we would also hope, that the possibilities of disabled persons are definitely mostly developed. But could you give us the update of the European Accessibility Act, because it's a topic which was on agenda for several years. We know that the assessment study seems to be coming to an end. Where do we stand now? Can we expect improvements this year?
Well, I would say that this year we will probably not have very significant results. I would first of all thank the Slovenian Association to invite me here to this important conference. I have prepared some notes, of course, just to concentrate as much as possible my ideas in order to have the maximum of communication. And so, if you allow me a short introduction, I would say that what we are aiming at is, first of all, a rights-based approach. And when I speak about a rights-based approach, I think about human dignity. You mentioned already equality for all, in particular gender equality, respect for diversity, so that all groups are represented and all groups are heard in society, solidarity, freedom, social justice, sustainability, transparency, and participatory democracy. How is the situation regarding all these important issues? If we look at the situation, we see that if we fight for equality for all, we think of eradication of discrimination, first of all, realization of equality in all areas of life. We think about strong protection and welfare systems. We think about socio-economic justice, which means elimination of all forms of inequalities in this field. And then for all people, but in particular for persons with disabilities, a decent work and a qualitative employment, so that the services are centered to the person and are oriented towards the common good. So we want that ensure universal access to qualitative, affordable, and accessible public and social services. Well, the social situation in Europe is worrying, as there is a general recession trend. And due to the lack of growth, the social situation and the living conditions of the majority of the European citizens have not been improving as much as it was expected. In the last years, the EU priorities have been characterized by fiscal consolidation and austerity regulations that have failed on the poorest in our society. 130,000 is an enormous number of people who are poor in the rich European Union. And I remember when I was in China last year, they said, oh, you see, China is rich, but Chinese are poor. And we are more or less in the same situation. Too many people are poor. The GDP is shrinking by 0.3%. Austerity policies contribute to have dramatic consequences. So many member states implemented austerity measures by cutting expenditure, especially, and this is dangerous for us, for social and health services, social protection, and also education. So I see that, you see that the situation is not very favorable to obtain important and significant results in a so short time as by the end of this year. So I think that my first answer to your question would be no. The situation is not positive enough, and we are faced not with progress, but in general with regression.
But how could we change this? Because there are some procedural problems, especially regarding this assessment study. So, okay, we have the crisis also here in Slovenia. Italy is also affected. Some parts of Europe are definitely not as effective as the southern parts. But is this only a problem of the current economic crisis, or is there more behind?
Yes, I think that there is more behind, because there is a kind of social deterioration. And next year, for example, we will have the election of the new European Parliament. And there is the risk, for example, that in the new European Parliament we will have the represented, the right wings of our society. In April 2013, the European Social Protection Committee, which is an important institution, warned against the increasing poverty levels in the EU and identified also what it would be the figure, the trend to watch at EU level, and increasing poverty and social exclusion for the overall population. What does it mean? How can we fight against this? We can fight against this with political and just political decisions to put money to put money in society and to make this money circulate. And we can have growth only if austerity is overcome, because austerity is killing the social system. And this is an old idea of the liberal school of Chicago, the so-called Chicago boys, who think that if you beat strongly a society, the society will wake up and will produce from itself the development. But it is historically demonstrated that this theory is absolutely wrong. And thinking about the title and the argument of our meeting today, I would say that there is a clear and urgent need to improve the participation of citizens and the possibility for citizens to really express their view and to organize themselves in order to influence strongly the decision makers in their countries.
Okay, Mr. Cattani, we'll come back later because you mentioned the Chicago boys. I can remember another group of Chicago boys who were active in the 30s, and they ended not quite well. Some of them suffered because they didn't pay taxes, but okay. How could we act realistically in the situation we have? It is a bad situation. It could be worse, as we heard, but we need to act in order to improve. What can all of us, what can everybody of us do to improve the situation we're in now, on the European level and also on the national levels?
Well, in general terms, I think that what is needed, first of all, is a shift from short-term measures to structural reforms in order to vitalize the economy. And despite the social situation has never been worse in Europe, in March the heads of states agreed for the first time to reduce the EU budget by 7% starting by the next year. And this goes against what we are expecting and against the fact that we absolutely must, as I said before, strengthen the economy and not bringing it to a more negative situation. Now, if we look at the general situation, I said it is necessary to think about what in not many years ago had been called the European dream. Talking about European dream, I remember the very nice and very interesting books of Jeremy Rifkin with this title. And the European dream was positive. The European dream was understood as an American journalist said very clearly that the European development was better for the future than the development of the US situation, the US economy. Now, it was in 2004. The crisis came, of course, in 2007, 2008, very strongly. But what the politicians, and maybe also the civil society, did not understand that against the crisis, you must fight with ethical and you must fight with principles. And principles have to be considered absolute. So, a rights-based society cannot say that the rights of persons with disabilities or whatever citizen are submitted to the economic, let's say, sustainability. Economy has to follow the principles and not the interests and the limited in-time interests. So I think that, first of all, we must think about the fact that we had a dream and we should not leave this dream and adequate ourselves to another way of understanding life and progress, and to think about our vision to build a new society. And this vision is possible only if, as I said before, the participation of citizens is revitalized, and that the divide, the gap between citizens and political decision makers and institutions in general is overcome, could be overcome. If I think, for constraints of time, I have to speak about the situation of persons with disabilities in particular. And here we have an important instrument, and the instrument is the UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. A convention that has been ratified by most of just 2 or 3 member states have not ratified this convention, but they say that they will do it. And it has been also ratified by the European Union. So for persons with disabilities, there is a strong instrument. There is an instrument which has to be implemented both at the European and member states level. Convention, which is the first convention that has been ever ratified by the European Union. This is also important. This gives an idea on how successful the disability movement has been in the past years. Now we see that the implementation is difficult because both the European Union, but especially the member states, try and delay the implementation of the convention. And this means that we stay with the old situation. I'm very happy that I heard that in Slovenia the system of the quota system is working. But in other countries, such as, for example, in France and in Germany, and also in Italy, unfortunately, the quota system is boycotted, both by the public authorities, but in particular by the entrepreneurs who prefer pay money instead of employing persons with disabilities. And the principle of the persons with disabilities, the last to be hired and the first to be fired, is still very, 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 you can find it in many countries, in many situations, also in Europe. The movement is now at European level very strong. In some countries it is also strong, in others less. But we see that if we ask for the implementation of the UN Convention, we go the right way, because there are the principles which, for persons with disabilities, make inclusion possible and the possibility to be realized. So I think that first, when persons with disabilities discuss with their governments, and the European Disability Forum discusses with the European Commission, when persons with disabilities discuss with political decision makers, they must have the UN Convention in mind. And all groups of persons with disabilities find in the Convention the solution to their problems. Persons with intellectual or cognitive problems for the first time are very clearly indicated to be rights holders. Maybe you know that there is a say that persons with disabilities are, let's say, just a moment.
You can say it in Slovenian if you want.
Persons who hold an impairment holders. This is the old way to understand disability. The new way to understand disability is the social way, and the social way says that a person is disabled due to the barriers existing in society. So if we say that persons with disabilities are rights holders, we say that these barriers have to be eliminated. And The UN Convention is the strong instrument which gives persons with disabilities the way to ask the decision makers in the member states and at the EU level also to take measures to really change the situation and to really dismantle the barrier. So from a barrier-full society to a barrier-free society. These, of course, are a little bit slogans, but we need slogans sometimes, as the fundamental slogan for persons with disabilities: nothing about us without us. No decision without consulting, no decision without supporting the participation.
Okay.
And